Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of VOX VOMITUS, also known as Word Vomit. I am your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the author of the Kindle Award-winning horror and suspense novel, Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as the Hotel series, and Pretty Ugly. Joining me today, as always, is my VOX VOMITUS vixen, Allison Martine, authoress of the Bourbon books, which include Dibs, Since September, and Move On, Melinda. With us today, all the way from Folsom County Prison, is Amber Garza talking about her new book, Where I Left Her. And no, she's not actually in the prison, but
about this far.
This far. Amber, welcome to the show. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your new amazing twisty book, Where I Left Her.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for having me, you guys. I'm excited to be here. So my name is Amber Garza, and I am the author of two thrillers, When I Was You, which came out last August, and then Where I Left Her, that came out this August. I've been writing since forever. I self-published and indie published for years, but with When I Was You, I switched to thrillers and got my first Big 5 deal. So it's been a dream come true. It's been so exciting.
And when you were doing the indie published and self-published stuff, when we looked you up, you were writing more romance stuff. Is that correct?
I was, yeah.
Okay.
Mostly young adult romance.
Yeah, I feel like you were, in a way, kind of a hybrid of Allison and I, because I write like thrillery, dark stuff. And Allison writes literary science fiction, speculative fiction, but she also writes romance.
Okay. Very cool.
I do not write romance. So what made you how did the switch happen? Were you always a thriller, fan and you just were writing in other genres? Or did you get told everybody's buying domestic suspense, that's what you should be writing?
No, I always loved mysteries. Like growing up, I read all Nancy Drew, and then I went into Mary Higgins Clark as a high schooler, so I always loved the mysteries. But I kind of fell into the young adult romance, actually, is what happened. When back in 2012, a lot of people were indie publishing. A lot of friends of mine were doing that, and they were finding a lot of success in the young adult genre. And in particularly romance, which I think is, for indie, I think that is a really good niche to hit if you can find a good romance readership. And so I went into that because I wanted to start to make money with my writing. I've been writing for years and just, swimming in rejection letters. So I wanted to just see if I could maybe try that route. And I loved it. I mean, it was so fun. I met so many great people. I have so many amazing fans from that and amazing author friends. There's so many great indie books out there and indie authors out there. But my biggest problem with it was, one, I did get a little tired of writing the romance after so many because, I was like, I really want to try my hand at a thriller. And then two, I always wanted to see my book in a bookstore. It's like, was just something I dreamt of always. And then three was just like the job security. Every year it was like, who knew? 1 year I would do well, the next year I wouldn't. And there wasn't always like a rhyme or reason for that I could find. And so I thought, I just need to try. And so I had this idea for a domestic suspense novel for like 10 years, but I always, I guess, had a lot of self-doubt and didn't know if I could pull it off. And I love anything psychological thriller, like I eat them up. And so I would read these and think, man, these authors are so incredible. I don't know if I could do this like mind bending and then flip the whole thing on its head.
The twist, knowing who did it,
right.
All of these things.
Yeah. So I just didn't know if I could do it, but I finally got to a place where I'm like, okay, like I'm just going to write this and see if I can do it. And then as I was writing it, it was working. And then I thought, I think I might have something. And so then I decided to try to get an agent, and I did, and get a book deal, and I did. So that was pretty amazing.
Yay.
So was that the first of the thrillers or the domestic suspense books that you wrote? Was that the one that you both got an agent with and got the book deal with?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, bow down in front of you.
It's for people who are watching who go, well, yes, that's how it works. No, generally it doesn't. It's really common to sign with an agent for one book and then either have to go through 2 or 3 books till one actually gets picked up, or 2 or 3 agents until a book deal happens, so that it happened your first date out. I mean, clearly you've been polishing your writing with the other genre, and that transferred over.
Right.
And an idea that was like 10 years in the making.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely feel like the indie publishing, it really taught me to become a good storyteller. I feel like if you look back at my books at the beginning and then look back and then look at now, I've come so far. And I think there is something to that, like learning what readers like and learning to write for the reader, not for getting published or not for the agent or the publishing house. And, you know, and
it's so hard
learning what
not
works
to
and what
think of
doesn't.
those things. It's, you know, like, so Allison and I are both indie published, but we're also like hybrid authors, like who, like, you know,
we're all over the map.
We're all over the map. So it's like, you know, books out on sub, having an agent, writing something that my agent wants me to write, that I wanted to write, but I'm like, not knowing how, because for years I've been like, oh, I'm just like doing this because I'm an indie author and I'm gonna like write like these weird things and it doesn't matter if it like fits on a shelf. And now I'm just like,
be a real shelf,
because there's not gonna be a shelf. It's just a virtual shelf, and all books fit on a virtual shelf. So you were obviously very involved in the indie community as an author, and you had a fan following. Did you get any pushback from the indie community when you decided to like go traditional?
I did not. No, I'm still friends with all my same author friends there. My readers understood. I feel like if anything, I got just so much encouragement and everyone was so excited. And, you know, I think we all realize that we forge our own path, right? And, you know, there are some of my indie author friends that, you know, want to maybe go my same path and are trying to do that now, but a lot of them are doing great where they're at and they're so happy where they're at. But those friends of mine knew that I was wanting something different. And so they've been so encouraging that I made that happen for me. And I'm encouraging of the fact that they're going strong with what they're doing. So I find that the book community overall is just a really inclusive, really encouraging place to be.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. And I've got friends who are traditionally published, those who are indies, those who are hybrid. And I think everybody's just like, find what works for you. And we're here to back each other up. And it's not like, oh, well, you shouldn't go that way because you're betraying the indie community or anything like that. And I know some people, for them, they are very much so diehard indie and don't have positive feelings towards the traditional industry. But I don't think it necessarily translates to, and I wouldn't want that for you then. Like they understand that maybe it's not their path, but they still are encouraging on someone else's path if that's the route they want to take.
Yeah.
So do you think it was easier for you because you were also switching genres? So you weren't like, oh, this romance isn't going to go straight to you guys. This is going to go through this channel. And you were also then like making a new name for yourself as thriller author Amber Garza versus YA romance author.
Yes, I think that definitely helped. And I even think, you know, I know some of my readers that haven't followed me over. They're still just, you know, telling people about my young adult because that's what they liked, or they really don't like to read thrillers. They like romance. So that's fine too. I don't know if I ever have plans to go back to writing that. So I sometimes feel bad about that to those readers.
Oh, like you've abandoned them and you're like, no,
bye guys.
See ya.
But no, I think that did make it a lot easier. Yes.
Did you ever think about changing your name and doing a pen name to have a very clear brand break?
Jen's looking at me while she's saying this.
I'm not. I'm actually, you know, I know you always think I'm thinking about you, but I'm weirdly thinking about Mary Burton all the time, who's an amazing thriller writer, but she also writes romance under a different name. So I always think of her, and both of her brands are very successful, but they're two different brands.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was something that I discussed, not with the agent I chose, but when I did my agent calls, because I got several offers of representation. And one of the agents had mentioned that she would probably pitch me as a pen name. And so that's what made me start thinking about it. Like, would I do that? Would I not? And I really didn't care. I really would have done whatever they asked me. I will say, honestly, though, I'm glad that they did not ask me to do that, because it's really cool to see my name on a bookshelf in a bookstore. Like, because I had dreamt of it my whole life, to see it in my actual name has been really exciting. And having people that I haven't seen in years, like, oh my gosh, is this your, you know, getting in touch with me. This is you did it. You know, and that I wouldn't have had that had I been under a pen name.
Yeah.
And I think for my book that kind of, was with the big 5 publisher on a bookshelf, I wanted my name, but all that to say, I would have been fine with changing it if they had wanted me to.
I feel like
think we made
we're
more
all
of
in
a break
this.
with like my website and kind of where I went going forward. I think it's pretty common for people to write in lots of genres nowadays too. So I don't think I'm alone in that.
Exactly.
That has helped.
And I think we're all on the same page. It's like, I'll do whatever you tell me to do.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just surprised that they actually suggested it, because I think usually it's they would want to capitalize on anything you already had going for you. I know the reason I thought Jen was referring to me is because I intentionally am using different variations of my name. So I actually do see my name either way, because Allison Martine is my romance name and it's my first and middle name. And when I write for literary and for science fiction and fantasy, I do A.M. Hubbard, which is my first initials of my last name. So it's all still me, and I'm not ever trying to hide who I am, but they were like genre distinctions. And then it's almost like a branding for this type of book from me is this kind. And if you see this name, it means it's this kind, like just a quick banner there. But I'd forgotten that Mary Burton has those different names, but I don't know what's the other name that she publishes under.
I can't remember, because I've only read her as Mary Burton.
Because
I've only read the thrillers. I've only read the thrillers.
And everybody's only ever read Amber Garza, because there is no pen. Well, okay, if we would have done a pen name on the spot now, what's your pen name? Make one up.
I have thought of it, and I would probably do my maiden name Hopkins. And I've thought of the same thing as you. I thought I could do A for Amber and M for Michelle, which is my middle name. So A.M. Hopkins.
Yes.
I've thought of
good
it.
initials.
But...
Those are good. Your
good
pen names
initials.
would have been almost the same. A.M. Hubbard. A.M. Hopkins.
We would have been shelf
next
buddies.
To each other on the shelf.
We would be. Yes.
Well, but no, because you're over in thrillers, and I couldn't write a thriller to save my life. So we would not be on the same shelf there, but maybe
in the library.
In the library, like mine,
a small
where they
library,
do, like, a sticker, and they don't actually bother sorting by genre, other than large print for people who can't see. Then I look for like the little tiny wizard or the little tiny spaceship to see fantasy or science fiction. Like, we can't separate this out, and they're like, no. All right, fine. Maybe it's better at the Folsom Prison Library. I don't know what you guys have there.
The prison library.
The prison library.
We're really fancy over here in the prison library.
Yeah, live from the prison library, Amber Garza. So I'm going to go back to something you said, and you said it as a kind of a throwaway line, a joke, but we all feel this in our soul. You said like you were drowning in a sea of rejection letters.
Mm-hmm.
All writers have been there. And I feel like readers are like, well, it can't be that bad. Thank you. It is.
I wish this were vodka.
I wish this was. Yeah, I wish all the water was vodka. How did you? Because you obviously were, plugging at it for a long time. How did you keep going with the rejection? Did you ever get bitter and say, this isn't for me? Or did you just like always know in your soul that this was what you were meant to do?
Oh, I for sure had moments where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I really remember right before I self-published, I had a weekend. This was so weird. It was a holiday weekend, and I got 3 rejection letters in the weekend.
Oh, on a holiday weekend. Mean.
Thanks for catching up on your backlog.
And I just was
what holiday, dare I ask?
Go away day?
It was like just where you just have the one day
like
off. So I don't know. Whatever,
Labor Day,
maybe? Monday.
Labor Day.
Labor Day, something. I mean, it was so silly, but it was just weird, right? And I just remember breaking down and crying to my husband, and I'm like, I don't think I can do this anymore. Like, it's just too hard. Like, maybe this just isn't my path, and I think I'm going to quit. And I remember him saying, like, so by quitting, do you mean you're going to quit writing? And I was like, of course not. I love to write. And he goes, so by quitting, you just mean you're not going to try to be published? And I'm like, yeah. And he was like, if you can't quit writing, like if you love it that much, then you need to keep going. And at that point, that's when I decided, like a month after that, to self-publish, because I just was like, I need a break from the rejection. I needed to just like at least try something where people would be reading my work. And even if it wasn't a lot of people, at least, I would get some type of positive feedback, or I'd be moving in a forward direction. I just felt like I needed to try something different.
Yeah, no, and I like, it definitely does put you in a direction to be like, I'm going to self-publish, because I've done it, Allison's done it, where you're just like, okay, we're going, like, I'm not writing.
Right.
And I think, you know, I self-published because I was like, I didn't want to hear no again. And it's just like, it's like, it chips away at you. And that book that I heard no about is the one that went on to like win an award.
Oh,
like
wow.
a decent award, and has done like indie well, I guess.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. It's done
No
well
one
for me. Nobody knows what that means. But so I just remember thinking, like, I went back and forth going, oh, should I have queried this longer? Should I have tried to get a bigger deal with it? But then I realized my entire career, in air quotes, would be completely different had I not self-published.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that there's a lesson in there too. Like, I mean, I think even agents would say this. Rejecting a book doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. They could just have something like that. You know, there's a lot of reasons it gets rejected. But when you're on this end, it just feels like, oh my God, my book is bad.
Right.
It's just a hard thing to kind of shift your mindset to be like, okay, keep going.
Exactly.
You know, maybe they did like it because you don't know.
You don't know. Because I remember getting like one very specific rejection letter. Well, I remember all of them, but one that was just like, I loved it, but I can only sign 2 clients a year. And it was like the first week of January. So like, so it was like, it's a long year, and I don't know if I love it enough to like sign one author right now and then be like, I've got 365 more days and I can sign only one other person.
Right. Yeah, that I know it is a hard business.
Yeah, get a thick skin.
Well, was your experience then querying as a thriller writer very different from querying as a romance author?
I mean, it's hard to say because, I mean, obviously it was very different because it actually worked this time for me. But
well, there's that. But I mean, it's also a different time in your career, and also being able to point out, hey, I'm not sure whether in your query you included, I have been a successful author already in this other genre as a self-published author. I know sometimes people are split about whether or not you include that. Some systems like basically ask straight out, have you published a book before? So you can't hide it in if you wanted to. But then I also
put it in my query letter. And then I will say that my agent that I have now has never seen that. I mean, she point blank told me she never saw that as a I always thought maybe they'd see it as a drawback. Like, you look at my sales, you see that I'm like doing decent, but not nothing to write home about. And she said she never saw that as a drawback. I knew the business. I knew what people liked. I knew the marketing piece. I knew all the sides of this business. And she saw that as an asset.
Yeah.
So I think that
and it is an
misconception that they don't want to know that about you. But I don't think agents are looking at self-published authors and thinking that's not good. I think they see us as businesswomen, as competent, as knowing this business. We have things to offer because of our experience.
Yeah, I agree. So like, I signed with my agent because she was close to queries, but she's also a best-selling author. It's Paula Mounier. Everyone, Paula Mounier.
Shout out to Paula.
Shout out to Paula. Sometimes she like pops in and she's like, hey. But
if Paula's listening.
Hey Paula. But I had wanted to query her so bad, but she was close to queries. But then I had a book and I sent her a message and I was like, would you consider blurbing my book?
Okay.
Didn't even think that she would be open to queries or anything. Right. She read the book, loved it. And this is a self-published book. And then messaged me and she's like, who's your agent on this? And I was like, I do not have one.
Are you interested in the job?
I was like, but if you're ever open to queries again, I'd love to query you. And then she said, let's have a meeting. And at that point I was like, I don't know what that means. And I remember texting Allison like right away.
The number of messages I got going, I don't know what she wants. I mean, she's not calling to insult you. Whatever it is will be good.
Right.
We don't know specifics, but it's good.
But it was just weird because she was like my dream agent for years. And I'm like, oh, my dream agent, she's close to queries and always will be forever. And now she's my agent. So it's
cool.
Still weird. It's so cool. But yeah, so sometimes it just happens when you're like, oh, I wasn't really expecting that. So
Right.
So especially like, so you went from YA romance to thriller. That's a huge jump.
Right.
Um, did you did you know, like, part of you, like, in your heart of hearts when you wrote that first thriller that, like, this is it? This is going to be in Barnes and Noble?
I did. I mean, I think, like I was saying, I think that's why it's hard to know if this experience was different, because I think I grew so much as a writer. And I think by the self-publishing, I learned how to write a good hook and a good blurb. And so I knew I had a strong query. Like, I knew that right away. And I knew I had a good hook with it. And yeah, I think when I started querying, I had a lot more hope that I would find someone this time. I think I would have been more surprised had it not happened for me this time. Even though I was shocked when it did, I think I was less shocked than I would have been 10 years ago, you know?
It does.
I'm just going to hop on. Laurie Schoenfeld said she was happy to see you make that jump to the thriller side because she's a thriller writer as well. And she loved hearing that part of your journey, Jen, as far as how that ended up with you and Paula. It is funny that you say that, Amber, because I've talked to a lot of different authors, and some of them, it's like they're actually surprised at which book is the one that gets them, like if they were in the query trenches for a while, because they're like, oh, this is the one that's going to work, and then it doesn't get any bites. And then they write one kind of like, I have to do something, and then that's the one that signs their agent. So it's interesting how sometimes our instincts lead us astray, but yours were spot on, so that's good.
How is your writing process different, like writing YA romance versus thriller? Because thriller is like one of my favorite things to read, but like when I think about writing it, I just get like so overwhelmed because I feel like I would need to know what was going on.
Right. And you're a pantser.
And I'm a pantser, so I'm like, oh gosh, what if I don't know who killed the person? Can I write a thriller?
Right. Well, When I Was You, I wrote it the same as I've written all my books, and I have always been a pantser, so I just wrote it. And it took like multiple drafts before, like the whole first draft, I didn't know what was going to happen. At some point, I'm like, I probably should know how this thing's going to end. And so then I had to go back and layer in the second layer once I figured it out. But now that I'm on deadlines and I'm writing one a year, and I have to pitch a different way to my editor as well, now I will write like a full outline out before I get started. And the pantser thing did not work for me with where I left her. Yeah. I was writing it during a pandemic.
Which was really fun to be writing during a pandemic.
Yeah. We all know it was just creatively, I wasn't there. And the pantser thing was not working. So I learned to outline with that book.
What's funny, I feel like it was mid-pandemic when I thought to myself, maybe if I wrote an outline, this would be easier because I would know what was going on.
Right.
And I still didn't write an outline because then I think I messaged Allison and said, like, how do I write an outline? And she was like, I don't know.
Well, and I joke, the only time I've ever written an outline was for an R&R where I had to do 100 pages of revision and then an outline for the remainder of the book. And the only way I knew how to do the outline was to do the revisions in the remainder of the book and then do an outline of it. So it's like, pretty sure that's not what they expected. But then the important thing was it was already done. And I didn't have to go back and make the revisions because they were already completed. And I'm sure that's not what they expected. But, you know, when you're the person who only figures it out by writing it, doing the outline is like, the magic isn't missing. When I push the button, nothing happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's however the process works for you. Because even like with where I left her, like, you're right. I did an outline while I was writing, but I did one afterwards because in revisions, I'm like, I was all messed up on those times.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I had to like write this giant outline that was across my office wall with like, okay, 5 p.m., then this p.m.
This many hours after drop off. Because
I was
like,
so
you would need a clock.
by all of that.
Yeah.
Like it gives me chills, like the blah, blah, blah after drop off. I'm like, yes, this is so good. But that's why I was like, how did you do it? Like, did you need like a serial killer style thing on your wall?
It was pretty tedious, that part. Because I was like, I'd go back to it and I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is happening before this one happened. I kept messing up those times.
I'm not good with that. I can understand you'd need to write it out and be like, hold on, check the wall. All right, that's right.
I'm very close to like the end of a draft of my work in progress. And I'm at that point where I'm like, oh, I've messed up. It all takes place in like 1 month. And I'm like, wait, when did that person say that? blah, blah, blah. So I literally just have like a huge chunk of like what I've recently written, like highlighted and
Fix this.
fix it. And I even made the character say, what month is this? Is it August? Is it July? But in my head as a writer, I'm like, is it August or is it July? When is the last time she was at work? I don't even know anymore.
Well, and do you write in order? Because I don't, and so I do that a lot.
Oh.
I'll read the first draft and I'll be like, oh, she's referencing something I haven't actually said to her, but I wrote it before I wrote this scene.
Well, and okay, so your book is just fabulous, and I'm trying to figure out how to talk about it without ruining too much. Is it fair to say that Where I Left Her, and this I don't think is a spoiler, involves a mom who drops off a teenage daughter for a sleepover, goes to pick her up, and the kid isn't there, and nobody's there that she expects to be there.
Yeah, it's not even the right house.
Spoiler, right? That's like right at the beginning.
Yeah.
But then you've got these other storylines woven through that as a reader, we're still piecing together when and who and what all's going on with just this cryptic name. And I won't even say what that is. That's woven through that. We're like, what? Who is this person? Who is this narrator? This isn't the main character. What? Huh? And so I can see how you maybe like write that and then have to weave that through.
Right.
Because you wouldn't want to just dump that somewhere.
Right.
What was the process?
And I wrote all those like interstitial chapters. Like I wrote those all in one document by themselves.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I had to decide where I wanted to put those in.
Yeah, and I've done that before, not in the thing I just finished, but the one before that. I had those kind of little interstitials, and figuring out where they flow best sometimes really, and what order they should go in wasn't necessarily the order I wrote them in, and wasn't necessarily where they originally were in the document. Because sometimes I'd have like 3 or 4 together, just because that's where it was in the process of me pantsing my way through things.
Right.
And then like, okay, this one goes here, and some of them ultimately got cut too. But it's one of those things where you go with where the muse leads you, and then later on you figure out, muse, you don't know what you're talking about.
Sometimes the muse is drunk. The muse is drunk.
Totally drunk.
The muse is drunk and wandering around.
Muse is hopped up on some caffeine.
So Amber, I loved all the different timelines, like the 2 major kind of, but I also really loved, and again, I'm trying not to be spoilery, there are portions that are written in only italics in your book that seem to be like memories that are just coming back in the middle of a scene.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that so much, because I feel like this is how memory actually works. You could be like walking down the street and then like flooded with something and then go right back to the scene.
Yeah, those interruptions.
Oh, it was so good. So when you were writing this, did you ever think like, am I making this too complicated? Is there too many balls in the air?
I thought of that a lot. I was struggling with this book because of that, because there were so many things I needed to tell the reader that at times I got overwhelmed with it. And then that's when I kind of lose my creativity or go through the self-doubt of like, oh no, people are going to hate this. It's so confusing. Is this even making sense? So those were like the agent calls, like, talk me down. Let's look at this. But once it was all finished, and I remember like when we finally got like the final draft and I read through it and I'm like, oh, this does actually make sense. But when you're writing it, you're like, does it? And I'll be honest, I mean, not every book is for every person. And I have read the odd reviews where they think that there's way too many things. She has too many timelines. I hate her flashbacks. And so I get that. Like, I knew there would be those people, but I think overall it worked. And the end, it was a lot of stuff that had to happen, but I think it pulled together.
It really did.
I would say I'm not going to spoil anything here, but there was one thing, like I saw one of the reviews that, because like Jen finished after I did, and she's like, I finished. And she's like, did you like it? I'm like, oh, I loved it. And we were talking about what we liked. And I said, I saw some reviews that were harping on one particular thing, and they said, oh, this, I can't buy into that. And I'm like, but I know it's actually happened in real life, because I know people it's happened to. It's like, we'll tell you afterwards specifically what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but we had a long conversation about that today, where we're like, it is believable, and F those people.
But different people have different levels of like, if it didn't happen to me specifically, therefore I don't buy into it. But so often in thrillers, how often is anybody like kidnapped or murdered or whatever? That's usually not most of our experiences. Thank God. But so those kind of reviews, you just got to tell them, sorry, you're no fun, go away.
Right. Well, and there's always like this, there is some like places where, as a writer, you're going to ask the reader to suspend disbelief. You know that. And you have to pick and choose how many of those your reader can stand. But there has to be places, because no thriller would ever work if you thought through every single thing, like, could this really 100% happen? There's always going to be those things, or there wouldn't be any plot twists,
Yes. And plot twists, I love them. And honestly, I think they work the best when you're like, that couldn't happen.
Yeah.
Really? As somebody who's recently written a plot twist that I'm like, oh my God, this is like, I have a feeling I will get a lot of people going, that would never happen. And I'm like, it could happen.
In fiction, it can happen.
It can happen. And it's
all the
sometimes,
time.
it's funny because I think sometimes we've had plot twists in our own lives that are like, okay, that's implausible. Like, yeah, but I lived it. So sometimes it's that whole like, yeah, I've had weirder things happen to me. That seems pretty tame there, Jen. You're fine.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Life can often be stranger than fiction. You're right. So weird things happen in real life.
Well, so in your book, you have a mother-daughter relationship. Is any of that based on any of your own experiences, either as being a mom or as being a daughter, or is all of that just drawn from the ether?
Oh, are you asking if this is based on the fact that she's wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt?
Was
she a
rebellious mom?
I know. I'm like, is she the rebellious mom or the bad teenager?
I'm both, really. I was a rebellious teenager for sure. But I have a teenage daughter. She's 19. And I really did. She and I have a great relationship, but she's a lot of sass. She's always been a lot of sass. So for me, it was like a lot of those scenes where she's being extra sassy, like some of those I pulled like straight from my daughter's mouth. The Finsta thing was interesting. In researching this book, I found out my daughter had a Finsta.
Oh my God.
No.
And I found a way to stalk it for like 3 months. And then I like messed up one night and said something I shouldn't know. And she found out.
And she's like, oh, Mom, you're following me. Well,
my God.
So I have 3 little people, and my oldest is she's like days from her 11th birthday. So reading this was terrifying in places because it's like this glimpse. I'm like, no, especially because there's a lot of times where there's a reflection back between the relationship where they were tight and going to swim meets, and it's just the 2 of them. And then it's like
Gilmore Girls gone bad.
Yeah.
Yes. who is the stranger giving me attitude? And some of the kind of get out of jail things, like, oh, well, it's a delayed tracking thing, and I walked through the park to come home. Did you not refresh your phone? I was just like,
no. Like you could hear that voice.
Yeah.
I was like, oh. And I feel like I'm not a mom, but I used that tone with my mom a lot. And not about cell phones, but I could hear it. And I was like, oh, I was a bad kid.
Yeah. Yeah. And those things with the phones, because my son's 22 and my daughter's 19. And with both of them, I mean, they both push the envelope a lot with the phones. And I do track my kids. Even to this day, I track my kids. So some of those phone things were real conversations as well. My son would do that a lot. I think your phone is glitching, Mom. I wasn't
blah, blah, blah. It definitely your phone needs to be updated. Oh, you're so old. That kind of thing.
You just don't know how to use that app.
Yeah, you don't know how to use an iPhone, Mom. God.
That's when Amber comes back like, Guns N' Roses, still cool, Mom. You be quiet.
Yeah. Exactly. I was doing this before there were cell phones. When our parents had to drive around after us in cars.
Right. Yeah, or back in my day where it was the pager and it was the whole like, oh, I'm going to page you and then you've got to find a phone to call me back, that kind of thing.
Oh, I remember those days. The 911 pager, you're like trying to find a phone, calling your parents collect because you don't have change.
Oh my gosh. I remember doing that from a mall when I was like, I went to meet a boy and then of course he didn't show up. And then I had to like call my dad collect to come pick me up. He was like, I thought you were at so-and-so's house. And I'm like, crap.
About that.
She
lives at the mall.
She has moved into the Gap.
It's like, you heard me say Abercrombie and Fitch? No. That's my friend's name.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one time I was at a friend's, calling my mom from like a Denny's or something from a payphone. She hung up with me, knew something was wrong, called my friend, and my friend was not prepared. Like,
first
no,
off,
Amber's
y'all
not here.
gotta
And
be
then
on the
she
same
called
page
me.
with your cover
Then I
stories.
called again. Oh, and my mom's like, I'm gonna hang up again and call you at the friends. And I'm like, oh, I'm just so screwed right now.
It's so bad when that happens. Like when you do the cover story of like, just tell my mom I'm in the bathroom. And then it's like, how often are you in the bathroom when your mom keeps calling back?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if you ever like gave them like the payphone number, like, yeah, you could just call her parents' house. It's blah, blah, blah. And they're like, that's not the number I have here.
Right. Yeah. See, our kids have no idea what we went through.
How dumb our lies were when I was like, no, I'm calling from her dad's other line in his home office.
Right.
Mom. Like clearly at a gas station.
Well, Amber, you say you now pitch differently and you've got one book a year. So does that mean you've got another book that's already in the works? And how is that one going for you?
So book 3 is completely done. It's kind of funny. I finished the final edits on it the week before Where I Left Her came out. So it felt really weird, right? Like talking about Where I Left Her, and in my mind, I'm all, wait, what book am I on? And so
no idea.
And I'm currently almost done with the rough draft of book 4, but book 3 will come out next August.
You are a machine, woman.
You are a machine.
I love it.
Edit, promote, release.
Love it.
Yeah.
Is this other book, are you writing about the other Amber Garza that lives in Folsom County? Because I read your bio and there's another Amber Garza that lives here too.
So When I Was
That's
You,
book 5.
that story.
Oh,
So
really?
with When I Was You, there's 2 women in the same town with the same name. One goes missing, the other one might know why. And I took that from my real life experience with this other Amber Garza that we've known about each other for years and years. We've never met, but that's how I got the idea for When I Was You, was from her.
And that's so funny with the names. We joke, my husband's first name is Michael, which is very common. And he found out that his paycheck from the school district was going to some other person who's in the school district, because there were 2 of them in the same school district, and it was like auto paying to him. It's like,
oh
we
my
kind of
God.
like that money though. It got worked out, but the whole, wait a second, there's 2 in the same school district, but you name your kid Michael, what are you going to get?
Yeah.
Amber, not as common, but based on how old I'm guessing about you are, there are a lot of Ambers in our generation. That was a very fancy common name.
It was I had friends named Amber, and they were my fancier, cooler friends, because I was a Jennifer, so that's just like the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, it's just funny though with the other Amber Garza, because I think what made her funny to me was that every time someone would say, have you ever met her? And I'd be like, no. And if they knew both of us, they'd be like, oh my gosh, you guys would really get along. You're both blonde. We're only like a year apart.
You're both blonde is like how people should get along.
Right.
Blonde.
Well, I guess they would say like her personality was kind of bubbly like mine or something, but it was just funny how much they would compare us. And that just made me think, like, that's what gave me the idea, was like, what if 2 women in the same town with the same name that were similar, like, met and wanted each other's lives? That's how, like,
I love that.
What went through my mind.
So for the one that you just finished a draft on, that's book 3, and then you're starting book 4 now. So are these
almost
all
done with the rough draft of book 4 now?
Nice. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And are they all standalone?
Yes. Yeah. So book 3 is called Winnie Came Home. And it's a widow, and she lives in like this giant Victorian home in Midtown Sacramento.
You just said Jen's favorite
word.
Like,
you said a lot of my favorites.
And so she asks her estranged adult son to move back home. Within a month of him being there, 2 women in the neighborhood are murdered. And she starts remembering like disturbing behavior he exhibited as a child. So she thinks she's living in her home with a murderer.
I bow down to you.
I love it. My
all
third one
of
is
the
my
things
favorite.
I love. Had it been on an island, I would have been like, send me that book right now. My gosh, like living in the house, a Victorian house with a possible serial killer who's your like weirdo son.
Yes. And her house, she believes, is haunted by a little girl who was murdered there years ago.
Yes. 1,000 times yes. Anyways, so
that'll be next summer.
I can't wait that long.
And
Well,
all of
hopefully
these
I'll
now.
get ARCs soon, so maybe we'll be in touch.
Jen's like,
I'm
"Sign
like
here,
already will
please."
be like messaging your publicist tomorrow and just being like, just like the second you get that, can it just be in the mail to me?
Right over here. And when you're doing these now, when you say you've got to pitch them differently, now is that because you've got to do like the full outline for them now instead of just like here's a one line hook?
Yeah, so for when I sold When He Came Home, I pitched like the first, I want to say I did like the first 60 pages and then a full outline. And then for book 4, I just like my agent just gave them a bunch of blurbs of like potential blurbs for a book 4. Then they gave me the 2-book deal based on the book 3 outline. And then when I started working on book 4, I just sent them, I don't think they required it, but I sent my editor a full outline because I just want to make sure like you're good with where I'm going with this. And
Tell me now, please. Before
I
I'm
Tell
like,
me
keep
now
getting darker
before
and
it's
darker,
done.
So I just want to make sure everyone's good.
Oh.
did you say it's darker?
I just feel like all my books keep getting darker and darker.
Well, when you start with YA romance,
Oh, Jen sometimes loses stuff at 40. I was sure she was going to say when you start with YA romance, you can't help but go darker. But
Yeah.
I was gonna joke. I have the same issue with my romances that they each get a little spicier
Okay.
because you can't back down from that, you know.
Right.
So Jen,
Yeah.
you were saying with
Oh,
your
I was-
YA, does it get
I
darker
know, I
each
was-
time? Because yeah, it's obviously
Well,
darker than YA romance.
yeah, when you start with YA romance and then it turns into my son might be a serial killer.
Yeah.
Right.
It's getting darker.
Yes.
It took a serious turn.
It took a turn.
Yes, for sure.
Well, and definitely you have one level of, oh, my child might have gone missing, but maybe she's run away. We're not really sure. To my son is a serial killer, maybe. That even there's kind of there's a
We're
jump
taking
here
leaps
that
and
we're
bounds. I like
But
it.
I love to write about like the things that scare me. And so, you know, like your child being missing is scary, but there's also like when you raise a child, there's always in the back of your mind, like, what if my child does something horrible? Like, I think it's a fear we probably all have that we don't like to talk about because that sounds it sounds better to just say, I'm scared something bad's going to happen to my child.
Versus
than,
my
"I'm
child
afraid
is
my
something
child
bad."
might do something
Yeah.
horrific.
Yeah.
My child will do something bad to other
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I'm just laughing at where your kids feel about this. Like your daughter's like, "Oh no, you don't want to lose me," and your son's like, "You think I'm a serial killer?" Like, thanks a lot, Mom. Now we know who the favorite is. Kind of obvious there, Mom.
Well, it's funny because like I dedicated the first book to my husband and then the second one to my daughter. And so like natural progression would this one be for Eli. And I actually was laying in bed last night thinking I should probably ask him if he's cool with this.
I know.
Where this
They
book
love that.
goes.
This is to my non-serial killer son, Eli.
Yeah.
I would love you even if you did something horrible.
For Eli, please do not become a serial killer.
For Eli,
any of
who
those
is
would work. For
nothing
E-
like the son in this book. I swear to any potential love interest.
Yeah.
I promise he won't. You know,
He's
butcher
not
you
holding a
fiercely.
weapon to my throat. He's a very good boy. I love him very much.
Thank you, Norman Bates.
Oh, but I'm so obsessed with like all like the Bates Motel and Psycho and all of that. So
It
I
shows,
definitely
Amber.
love
It
that.
shows.
No, I know. I was like, no, that's kind of like that's a cool thing. Like Bates Motel, that was
Yeah.
Bates Motel is still, I believe, listed as my religion on my Facebook profile.
Oh.
Yeah, I was like Bates Motel. Like, you know,
Yeah.
if
I loved it.
people care to know anything about me, that's
This tells
where
you
I
what you need to
stand.
know.
It's what you need to know. I think at that you can go, yeah, I don't need to accept that friend request. Like you just delete it, or you go, yeah, that's somebody I want in my life.
Agreed.
Yeah. It'll weed through the people for sure. Get
Mhm.
your people.
Yeah, my people. That's us.
Yep, it is.
Oh, Amber, you have been fantastic. I hate for this to end, but we are out of time.
Oh, this has been so fun.
Amber, thank you for being here. Allison, thank you as always. Thank you to Roman and Pam at the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. This has been a copywritten podcast. Stay tuned next week when we have Wendy Webb. Back again, Wendy. Back again with Chardonnay and cardigans. She loves those things. All right, we'll